resolution, and our first contention is poverty reduction. America's means-tested welfare system is designed to funnel benefits to the least fortunate. As a result, Locks of Columbia in 2013 finds that welfare programs have reduced the national poverty levels by 40%. Affirming and replacing means-tested welfare with universal basic income would reverse this progress for 3 reasons. The first is by replacing targeted benefits. Shahar of the Benson Institute in 2019 explained that welfare programs are uniquely designed to aid the poor, providing targeted assistance for food, housing, and medical care. Replacing these development programs with a monthly check will be far less effective. Urzad Forbes in 2019 explains that 11 million American adults lack basic literacy skills, and without the guidance of the current welfare programs, many recipients wouldn't use their dividends effectively. Second is by diluting funding. Because welfare only goes to the poor, much larger benefits can be afforded. Tanner of the Cato Institute in 2013 writes that the median value of a welfare package is around $28,000 a year. A UBI would transfer resources away from those who need it into the hands of those who need it less, as even the most ambitious UBI plans of $12,000 a year would still cut the average welfare recipient's income by more than half. Third is by disregarding families. Means-tested welfare programs are structured to give more generous benefits to single mother households, as they have greater financial need than single individuals. Bradford, the Institute of Family Studies in 2018 confirms that children living with single mothers are 5 times more likely to be impoverished. And because of this, Goldman and the Pollier Institute in 2016 finds that single mother households receive up to $40,000 in welfare benefits. By contrast, a UBI definitionally excludes individuals until they are adults, essentially treating a single mother with 3 children as one person. Because of this, Montague John Hopkins in 2018 finds that even the most generous UBI plans, a single parent would still lose up to $19,000 in annual benefits. Without enough money to access a proper education or even most basic necessities, these children will be trapped in a cycle of impoverishment with no chance of upward mobility. For these 3 reasons, Roberts of the CVP in 2017 concludes that under any UBI, tens of millions of the poor would end up significantly worse off, and the Roundtree Foundation in 2018 furthers that a UBI would increase child poverty by 60%. Critically, Zeller of the Huffington Post in 2012 finds that low-income Americans get trapped into intergenerational cycles of impoverishment. In a 2016 Columbia University study found that poverty causes more death than any other leading cause of death in America. Our second contention is a chopping block. Financing a universal basic income would be incredibly costly. Jagger of the New York Post in 2018 reports that in a single year, a UBI of $12,000 per person would cost $3.8 trillion, and cutting existing means-tested programs would only cover 1/5 of the cost. Importantly, Greenstein of the CVP in 2019 explains that financing a UBI primarily through tax increases will be politically impossible, requiring Americans to accept a level of taxation vastly exceeding anything in history. And the World Economic Forum in 2019 finds that a permanent UBI couldn't be debt financed. Thus, the only politically viable way to fund a UBI would be to cut from other forms of government spending. Problematically, foreign aid would be the first to get cut. This is because, according to Rego Radius in 2017, foreign aid is a single program in the budget that the majority of Americans want to cut, with 60% demanding significant cuts. This is especially likely given that affirming less welfare spending, because Lancaster for the Center of Global Development in 2007 finds that when Americans see domestic spending being cut, support for foreign aid significantly decreases, because foreign aid is seen as trading off available resources. Ultimately, Rekindling of Stanford University in 2013 finds that foreign aid has empirically been the first thing on the chopping block in tough budgetary times. Critically, West of Xavier University in 2017 finds that since its inception, American aid has provided over 40% of the global population with food and funds, lifting tens of millions of people out of extreme poverty every single year. Budget cuts would thus be catastrophic for the global poor, as Gurma of the University of Nottingham in 2003 quantifies that every 10% decrease in U.S. aid reduces the Human Development Index by 3%, a measure of livelihood that analyzes education, health, and income of the poor. Critically, the IMVA concludes that poverty is the root cause of death in the developing world. Thus we need it.
Financing a UBI would be politically impossible. Or no, you did debt financing.
Well, the clause says permanent UBI cannot be financed with debt.
Yeah.
That will say that.
Also, basically, like HDI card.
Was it Florida?
Yeah,
Can I see the
writing down what card it is.
Okay.
Can you show me which debt has the what you pay? It's like, you know, the HA metric.
You want us to look up the development index?
Is that just a checking?
Oh. You just want us to look up what it is?
No, what it says in the card HDI.
It said it's a measure of aggregate welfare.
That's fine. Is everyone ready? Nueva affirms our first contention is repairing the broken welfare system. Means-tested welfare is failing right now, as despite implementing 79 means-tested welfare programs and spending nearly $1 trillion a year on said programs, President 18 finds the poverty rate has largely hovered at 10% over the past 50 years. More specifically, current means-tested welfare programs are failing in two ways. First, by disincentivizing work. Unfortunately, most means-tested welfare programs struggle from an employment trap, where individuals near the poverty line are disincentivized from working so as to keep their welfare benefits. Indeed, 10 out of 15 of the Cato Institute finds that the welfare pays more than the minimum wage job in 35 states. Simply put, workers are turning away from more prosperous employment as they see that upgrading their job could sacrifice their welfare and leave them completely vulnerable. A UBI would eliminate that perverse incentive, allowing families to escape the trap of poverty and climb the socioeconomic ladder. These effects are historically proven, as Schneider 17 of USA Today explains that after families were kicked off welfare, they saw their income double in 1 year and triple in 4 years. Second, by wasting valuable funds. Welfare puts a dangerous amount of power and funding into the hands of an overly bureaucratic welfare system, which results in billions of lost dollars of funding for America's poorest. Indeed, 10 and 19 of Cato finds that the current system of welfare gives total power to individual states to decide how and where to spend their money, creating a nightmare of unaccountability where every state has different rules and restrictions. In this unaccountable system, dollars are squandered, as Vallis 15, the Center for American Progress, finds that in TAMP, one of the largest means-tested programs for families in poverty, only 25% of funds go towards actually helping those people. In other words, 75% of the $16 billion we spend on this program is wasted. Fortunately, a UBI would put money directly in the hands of those who need it, as Columbino 19 of the University of Turin quantifies that because a UBI is as simple as writing a check, the administrative cost of UBI could be 5 times smaller than means-tested welfare. Overall, the impact of these flaws in our welfare system is millions in poverty. J19, the Washington Post, quantifies that more than 25% of people living in poverty who are eligible for benefits fail to receive them. Our second contention is rekindling economic growth. A UBI would have a tremendous positive impact on U.S. growth as it puts hard cash in the hands of those who would spend it and stimulate the entire economy. Matthew 17 of Vox warns that the economy generally tends to slow down and struggle when the middle and lower class aren't earning enough to spend and stimulate businesses to produce goods and services. Fortunately, a UBI would give individuals money to spend productively, bolstering the economy. Matthew continues that as the poor and middle class begin to receive their UBI, $2.5 trillion of spending would enter the economy by 2025. The overall result of the UBI would be massive U.S. growth. Zesa 17 of the Roosevelt Institute quantifies that an annual UBI of $1,000 would increase economic growth by a staggering 12.56% over the next 8 years. The impact of economic growth is alleviating poverty. As the American economy grows, so do the job opportunities, wages, and standard of living of millions of citizens. Ferrara 14 of Forbes finds that the economic growth of the last century has decreased child mortality by 95% and that the living standards of America's poorest have doubled. That's why Ferrara concludes the economic growth should be viewed as the ultimate solution to poverty. But economic growth also allows businesses to produce more and hire more workers, alleviating poverty via employment, which is why Matthews adds that the economic effects of a UBI stimulating demand will lead to the overall creation of 4.7 million jobs. The impact is also scalar, as Bernstein 11 continues that every 1% increase in GDP creates 1 million jobs. Importantly, Injawadi 16 finds that jobs are the surest and fastest way out of poverty because even if welfare makes sure people have enough food to eat, jobs ensure that people leave poverty and continue climbing the socioeconomic ladder because job experience leads to better jobs. At the end of the day, you're going to be affirming.
is lost to bureaucracy every year?
25%.
Oh, well, that's of one program, right? So I'm talking about the entire welfare.
So
spending
one,
of the
our,
United States.
yeah, so first, our balance evidence isolates one welfare program tells you use 25% of the overall administrative costs. Okay, this is like a three-part answer. This is important because your third argument about single mothers is dependent on this program, so let's put off as rust. But third and more importantly, the Columbino evidence does a comparative and tells you that UBI has 5 times smaller administrative costs than any welfare program, which means that UBI is always a profitable solution to welfare, even if welfare is that inefficient.
The reason you're avoiding my question is because there's extremely small amount of bureaucracy that occurs, right? The only evidence you give is 25% of a single program. There's still tons of other programs that don't have a ton of bureaucracy, which is why there's only a few $1 billion lost to bureaucracy each year. The budget for welfare is hundreds of billions of dollars. So I'm confused what your terminal impact is if only a very small percent is lost to bureaucracy.
I just answered it 3 ways. One, UBI will always be competitively better than the current welfare system. 2, and more importantly, we actually give you the evidence from specific programs that tells you 25% of rural funds are wasted. I have a question. Sorry, 75% of funds are wasted. I have a question.
Yes.
Let's talk about your third argument about family. The first card you tells you that means-tested welfare gives more money to single mother households, but then the second card tells you that children living with single mothers are 5 times more likely to be in poverty. Doesn't that just prove welfare is not working the status quo?
No, it
insofar as people who get welfare are still in poverty.
No. The card that's saying that they're 5 times more likely to be in poverty is not like with welfare. It's not like because there's a greater financial burden because they have children. That's why they receive more benefits.
No, the way
under UBI.
So your evidence says.
Means-tested welfare.
Okay, so how many children are in poverty that aren't in means-tested welfare?
How many children are in poverty that are on means-tested?
Because you said your evidence is comparing the number of people in poverty, the non-welfare, to the number of people in poverty in welfare. So how many people are in poverty that aren't on welfare?
Do you have a number?
I mean, yeah, our evidence says 25% of people in poverty aren't on welfare in the first place. So that obviously mitigates your
What
impact.
did your evidence say?
25% of people in poverty aren't on any
Okay, and
welfare.
we're obviously going to contest that. We're going to say that there are.
Yes, so I'm asking you, why are you contesting? You're saying I'm contesting it. You have to give me a reason as to why you can contest it.
I mean, why we're contesting it?
It's like, what's wrong about our argument that makes your argument preferable?
Yeah,
Why should you win?
we have evidence that indicates from the United States Census that 50 million people are getting benefits from means-tested
So
welfare.
how does that contradict all the fact that 25% of Americans
It
who are
doesn't.
in poverty?
It's just disagreements in statistics.
How does that disagree? You just said that.
Because you're saying people aren't getting it, I'm saying people are getting it. That's a disagreement. Can I have a question?
Yeah.
Okay, so on your argument about like your second contention about economic growth, so can you explain like how consumption factors in?
Consumption?
Yeah.
So argument is about consumer spending in the United States. So with the UBI, people also have $12,000 more income they can use more disposably, so they can like buy goods and services. It overall increases investor confidence and just gives people raw cash. That's just about it.
Here you're up.
After your speech, can I see the box 13 evidence you read the top?
Which one?
The box 13. Let's ask her.
Yeah, but what did it say?
It's box 13.
The 40%.
40% right. Yeah.
Oh, Fox. Oh, okay. Is everyone ready?
Yeah.
On their first contention about fixing welfare, they told you that the poverty rate has remained at 10%. That's because their measurements of poverty are bad. They don't take into account spending on education, housing, and healthcare that welfare gives them, which is why, even though it seems like they're under the poverty line, they're actually far more above. Then, on their first warrant about the work trap, lots of responses here. First is that the FGA finds that fewer than 1% of able-bodied adults on means-tested welfare, slightly more than 250,000 adults nationally, are within even 10 percentage points of this eligibility limit, which will cut off their income. Many of these individuals are a safe distance away from it. Second, the FGA furthers that major welfare programs provide off-ramps or transitional benefits for income changes, which is why enrollees double their incomes after leaving welfare, and Rector of Johns Hopkins confirms that under welfare, for every $1 of earnings, there'll be a net gain of 83 cents. There's not a disincentive. Third, Golden of the Center for Law and Social Policy finds that welfare programs have been updated to improve work incentives, which is why research overwhelmingly indicates these taking that as a whole supports work, especially for low-income parents, and that any work barriers are much smaller than welfare's work-promoting effects. Finally, it's still on a good thing, because Hamilton of the DHS explains that welfare was reformed to deal with their argument. The government provides education, employment, and support services to push them into the workforce, which is why Fox of Columbia finds that welfare has decreased poverty by 4%. Then, on the second board, about bureaucracy. There's a lot of problems here. First, only a few billion out of trillions of dollars we spend on welfare is lost to bureaucratic costs. We know this corruption doesn't matter because, again, Fox Columbia finds that welfare programs have reduced national poverty levels by 40%. Second, in reality, people do get access to welfare. Rector Johns Hopkins explains that the actual take-up rate of EITC, Medicaid, SNAP, and free school lunches is over 100%, so the people that need access are getting it, and the US Census finds that 50 million people have access to welfare. There's only 40 million people that are in poverty. It definitely affects enough people. Finally, even if slightly more people get benefits in their world, it comes at the cost of the rest of the poor losing all their upwards mobility. You're taking their benefits from $20,000 to $12,000, leaving them on net way worse off. Finally, their impact is that 25% of people in poverty don't have access to welfare. This evidence is A, about undocumented immigrants who a UBI wouldn't help, and B, people at risk of short-term poverty. Welfare targets people at risk of intergenerational poverty with a much better link in, and it's much stronger also. Let's go to the second contention about consumption. Lots of problems here. They say there's not enough consumption or spending in the economy right now, but Deloitte in July finds the economy actually has really strong consumer demand. The problem is weak business demand, but business demand won't increase because of general economic fears. They don't change business demand. Second, there will be no increase in disposable income. The advocate finds that any money people make from UBI would just be slashed from their income by their employers. Then they tell you it will lead to an increase in investor confidence, but this is only going to be super temporary. Sure, in the beginning, there'll be an increase in investor confidence because there's more consumption, but that consumption stays the same for the rest of history that we keep having UBI, so on net investor confidence would go back to normal. Then you can turn this against them. Because voice of the FEE explains that by providing a UBI score is higher consumption, because if that is true, then that would create inflation, as increases in demand and the money velocity places upwards pressure on prices, especially now as the economy nears full employment and productivity falls. In response, Fulger of Investopedia finds the central bank raises interest rates to reduce inflation, which is why, following Trump's tax cuts, the Federal Reserve increased interest rates from 1.4% to 2.4%, and because these interest rates raise borrowing costs and crowd out private investment, 98% of economists believe a UBI would be bad for the economy. Then you can turn this against them because means-tested welfare programs are crucial economic stabilizers. Hungerford of the EPI explains that during recessions, more people naturally qualify for welfare programs, while less people qualify during periods of high growth. In this way, our welfare system automatically cools down the economy when it's overheating and heats up the economy when it's barely standing, prolonging economic growth and shortening recessions. Because of this, Hood of JP Morgan finds that while recessions used to occur every 26 months, they now happen every 86 months, and recessions have terrible implications for the global poor because the UN finds that the last recession pushed 90 million people into extreme poverty worldwide. Finally, their impact evidence is that a UBI would increase economic growth by 13%. But it's matters that Warden redoes this study. It's terrible and adds extra controls in a better model and finds that a UBI would decrease US GDP by 9.3%. And again, 98% of the economists believe a UBI would be bad for the economy.
Policy blocks. Oh, no, we just. So the order is going to be starting on our case to their responses and then going to their case. Is everyone ready? All right. My time begins now. Let's start at the top of our first contention. They say that overall poverty has fallen by 40%, but our more holistic present evidence says the number of people in poverty has remained stagnant at 10% for 50 years. Their evidence says relative to some other threshold, it is around the same. That does not matter. The fact of the matter is the majority of people who were in poverty in 50 years ago are still in poverty now. Let's go to our first argument about disincentivizing work. We'll concede that fewer than 1% of people are within 10 percentage points of the income line, which means they don't have access to any of their terms because no one's actually affected by the disincentive to work. Let's go to our second dimension of economic growth. Their first response tells you we have strong consumer demand right now. The real problem is weak business demand. That doesn't change the fact that right now, our Matthews evidence case, you can still inject $2.5 trillion worth of spending into the economy over 8 years and create 4.7 million jobs. It does not matter how strong or weak consumer demand is right now. All that matters is in the long term, we're going to increase it. And our Matthews evidence also says even if it's high right now, in the long run, you're going to see permanent economic stimulus, whereas all of their evidence are short term. So even if consumer demand is high now, when it eventually goes down, we'll still have the same stimulus, which overall lifts everything up. Their second response tells you from Advocate that employers would slash from income. What the UN finds in 2017 is that a UBI would give the average worker more negotiating power. For example, if their worker is slashing their income, they can step away from that job and use their extra UBI money to go look for another job until the workers eventually realize they have to pay their workers the employers realize they have to pay their workers the fair share. Their third argument is about investor confidence. They say that investor confidence will return to normal. That's critical because our Narayan evidence indicates it would not be normal. It would be normal at a higher rate. If there's more people buying goods, then investors are more confident in the economy and more willing to put money in those goods. Their fourth response basically says this massive turn about inflation. But Zeza 17, the Roosevelt Institute, finds that even if you take inflation at its worst, A, there have been no historical examples of any other UBI causing this, but second, at most, it would be half a percentage point of inflation. Additionally, Zeza also says their story is all about interest rate hikes, but Zeza says with this inflation, he would not forecast any sort of increase in interest rates. Finally, they tell you that in a recession, more people qualify for welfare. They're misrepresenting their argument. What Econ 17 finds is the actual programs that increase during recession are A, more progressive taxation, and B, unemployment insurance. Neither of those are means-tested welfare. They don't access either of those arguments on the automatic stabilizers. Finally, they say a UBI would decrease debt by 9%, but that part is predicated on the assumption that debt would be finite in the U.S. economy. What Tully 18 finds is the U.S. has an essentially infinite debt ceiling because you can always take out more money, and investors are always confident in the U.S.'s ability to pay down its bonds. Let's go to their case. On their first argument about targeted benefits, we would say at best my opponents access keeping people around the poverty line, but they never access long-term growth. We would say that our employment impacts in our case for 4.7 million jobs are always going to be more important in the long run because people can actually lift their families out of poverty instead of the people who are hovering at the poverty line now. Their second argument is about people being poor, about UBI is $28,000. This is completely fake. This number is fabricated altogether. What Alternate 17 finds is the real amount the average person gets from welfare is $9,000. Because it takes the amount of money they spend on welfare and the amount of welfare recipients. That's the real calculation. It's actually less than what a UBI would be. This also applies to a third argument about families. Because in our world, the average single mother is getting more than she is now. Under their world, which is only around $9,000 for the average welfare benefit, especially considering the average calculation uses a single mother. So on net, you're making more money in our world. Let's go to their second contention about the chopping block. We have a couple responses here, but all of it's centered around the idea of recession. What Econ 19 finds is that if economic growth is permanently higher as it would be in our world, we are less susceptible to future economic shocks, pushing the entire economy into recession. There are two reasons why recession is important. The first is it affects people across the globe. In fact, what the IMF finds is 900 million people will go into poverty. This means if the entire US economy is slumped, then it ends up cutting all the aid benefits they talk about the fastest because it generates a lot of political change to prioritize the US and not focus on the rest of the world. But second, recognize if the US economy is growing, the positive effects will spread across the globe. Aurora 05 of the IMF finds a 1% increase in economic growth for developed countries leads to a 0.8% increase in the developing world. We would say you're always preferring our growth arguments because if countries are lifting themselves up, it's on that going to lead to a more sustainable long-term solution versus when aid does get cut in the long run, those countries are going to have nothing to rely on and they're just going to fall back into the rate of poverty they were before.
We're going to take a look.
Can you stop moving back and forth? Like I always have to change my camera angle. Just stay in one spot.
Can we see alternate?
Yeah.
Actually, what's the date on that? Okay, 2012. Oh, we'll keep going. That was 2 minutes 37 seconds.
That's all you remember.
Uh,
Do you remember?
okay, yeah, that was. Oh, sorry. I forgot.
Can you just say?
Oh, we have cross, right?
Oh. Go to this question?
Yeah, sure. So how do you prevent a recession?
So yeah, that's the there's evidence. So sorry, the Econ evidence says if the U.S. economy is always growing stronger, the kind of economic shocks that would traditionally push into recession are able to be buoyed back by their growth.
Wait, what about every other country? Why can't any other country cause a recession? Why can't Europe cause a global recession?
So no other country is connected to the extent that the U.S.
Yeah,
is
Europe
connected,
is.
But it.
China is.
Well, Europe is not a country; it's a system of other countries, and the
How is
European
that?
Central
Okay,
Bank.
okay, even more.
The European Bank has a very elaborate system to stop growth in individual countries. The U.S. doesn't benefit from that kind of
Europe has
overarching
definitely.
system.
The United States is not the only country that can cause a recession. Other countries have done it in the past.
Sure, maybe
so
that-
I'm saying even if you stop recessions from the United States, global recessions, your evidence about 900 million definitely isn't about the United States. It says any global economic shock would cause that. So literally any other country could do that, even if you stop the United States.
Two problems. One, our freedom evidence specifically isolates the U.S. as being the causal factor. And we would say it's pretty logical that, like, sure, maybe some other country can cause a recession. But as long as A, the U.S. has thousands of dollars in consumer spending, the U.S. won't get hurt by
No, so
that
that
recession.
consumer spending will help the United States.
And second,
but you don't impact
yes.
900 million people in other countries.
If you let me finish, I would have explained it.
So the first one didn't matter then. Yeah.
No, it does matter. There's hundreds of millions of people who live in poverty in the United States who are
Hundreds of millions of people in poverty in the United States.
100 million people who would be impacted by recession is what I meant. But second,
Yeah, 'cause there's
second and more
hundreds
importantly,
of
sorry, I never
millions
even got to
in the
finish my
US.
first thought.
Okay.
Here, more evidence says a 1% increase in developed countries' growth leads to a 0.8% increase in these developing countries.
That doesn't
So
mean that you decrease poverty in these countries.
What
You
it-
don't need any evidence on that.
what it does
say, see, this doesn't make any sense. You increase consumption, people are buying more from American businesses. How does that reduce poverty in Africa?
Okay, let's look at a really quick comparison, right? We're going to say
Just
that
answer my question.
What?
How does more buying from American businesses reduce poverty in Africa?
We import goods, for example, natural resources and oil from African consumers.
And how do exports help the African poor who are disconnected from export sectors?
You just make that analysis. We would say that they're
Yes,
not
I did.
disconnected. Like, millions of Africans work inside of these export sectors. Like, Africa doesn't just have an economy that's completely
So why is it that
disparate.
you can't read a single piece of evidence on that?
What? You just asked me this random line of questioning.
Why is it
I'm
that
answering it to the
I'm
best of my
asking,
ability.
why is it that your argument is that you increase growth in developing countries, but not poverty?
Okay, let's talk about poverty alleviation then. The only card you read about poverty alleviation, your second mention, talks
Actually,
about
we have 3 cards about it, but yeah.
Okay, my bad. Talks about an HDI, or a Human Development Index.
Yeah.
Can you explain what a 1% increase in an HDI means for poverty?
Yeah,
You're so good at quantifying poverty.
Thank you. So an HDI is a measure of livelihood that includes education, healthcare, income. So let's like a 1% decrease in that would be like a 1% decrease in what I just said.
I'd love to see the evidence, because that's what we called for before my rebuttal, and you showed us evidence that HDI increases by 5% maybe, and then it doesn't really say anything about
I don't
poverty.
think it said maybe.
I mean, the card basically said it would possibly increase.
It would, yeah, it would.
It said possibly, but regardless. Maybe I read it
I
wrong.
mean, you didn't respond to the impact, so that doesn't really matter.
Minutes. It's going to start on our first contention. Is everyone ready? They try to turn our first contention by saying the benefits they receive right now are around $9,000 that would increase under a UBI. But their evidence from 2012, the University of Michigan redoes their analysis in 2019 and finds that the average recipient of means-tested welfare is around $21,000, which means that in the app world, you're decreasing the income from means-tested welfare that these people get. Go to their second contention. We're winning this round because we explained that to pay for a UBI will cost $3.8 trillion, which would force budget cuts. And given that 60% of Americans support cutting foreign aid, this would be the first thing to get cut. The Reagan analysis, which they never respond to, finds that foreign aid has historically been the first thing to get cut in tough budgetary times. The web evidence explains that aid has provided for 40% of the global population, lifting tens of millions of people out of extreme poverty. There are two responses. The first, that in a recession, aid is going to get cut. But the CS News explains that in the 08 recession, aid grew by 80%. There's no link. But their next response is that recessions outweigh the foreign aid. Couple of responses. First, the FDER explains that foreign aid allows developing countries to build up their economies and resist future recessions, which means by giving aid, we sell back for future recessions. Second, there's no quantification on their side. You don't know how many people are lifted out of poverty when they prevent a recession, but you know that tens of millions of people are lifted out of poverty every single year because of the United States foreign aid. But third, recessions don't impact the developing countries because they're primarily exporting inelastic goods. That's why the St. Louis Fed explains that Asian and African countries were unaffected by the 08 recession. Their GDP grew by 50% in the following years. Foreign aid leads to schools, infrastructure, and hospitals that lift people out of poverty in the long term. But fourth, they're linked into a recession that there's more consumption of American goods. Even if you buy this only benefits American businesses and helps American poor. We explained that aid goes directly to developing countries who are much more in need of this aid because poverty is much worse in these countries. We're impacting the most dire people. The round is over. But with that, let's go to their case. On their first contention, about welfare being bad, they try to kick out of our terms about how means-tested welfare encourage work by saying that the work cliff doesn't matter. Even if it doesn't exist, we say that means-tested welfare encourages work. They drop the golden average that explains that means-tested welfare has been reformed to encourage work. Sorry, research shows that welfare increases the amount of work that's being done. They do the weighing for you. Employment is the best way to decrease long-term poverty. We're the only team that structurally incentivizes people to get jobs in the long term. We're winning on their case. On their second contention about global growth, two terms. First, the voice evidence explains that UBI increases in consumption, which is going to cause inflation, which forces central banks to increase interest rates, which then would cause a decrease in investment. That's why the Ward evidence redoes all of their studies about GDP growing and finds that GDP would actually decrease by 90%. All their responses about our evidence is bad. Call for it is really good. Then we say that means-tested welfare acts as an automatic stabilizer. When the economy is doing well, less people qualify for the means-tested welfare. It cools down the economy. When it's doing bad, more people qualify and injects capital. That's why the Hood evidence explains that while recessions used to occur every 26 months, now they occur every 86 months. They just say that our evidence is not about means-tested welfare don't act as automatic stabilizers. It does. Call for the evidence. It talks about things like food stamps. This is extremely important because the UN explains that the last recession put 90 million people into poverty. We are best mitigating the impacts of recession when they occur. That's what we need.
Can I see 86 months versus?
Yeah.
See what?
Honestly, aid programs with tens of millions.
Yes.
Like the 86 months now to 46 months, and then the second one is 10 million, tens of millions.
This is 86. I thought it was 10.
I want the other.
Oh, yeah, that was to get sure.
Oh, can I see the U Michigan study?
All right.
See the
Yeah, so
calculation of cost.
yeah, so it's the amount we spend on welfare divided by the amount of people in poverty. Same thing as here.
Listen over. Okay, is everyone ready? The order is, my case, their case. So my first contention.
What was 1 second?
5%. In this summary, they've dropped that welfare has been stagnant over the past 50 years and stayed at 10%. That's a drop precedent evidence. That's really important because what it proves is that welfare is actually improving people's overall quality of life. If anything, jobs are the only way to ensure that we have an irreversible chain out of poverty. At that point, let's go to the first argument they make on this turnabout means-tested welfare encouraging work. We have conceded their response that tells you only 1% of people aren't actually employed, which means none of their incentives work. All of their job impacts clearly outweigh on scope. With that, let's go to the second contention about economic growth. They extended a lot of terms through ink here. They don't respond to any of Purnell's front lines. The first term is about increasing inflation, but they completely drop these. That's analysis that tells you that no historical examples prove that American production is high enough to actually cause inflationary spirals. But B, they drop that even in the best case scenario, there'd only be 0.5 percentage point increase in inflation. And first of all, this doesn't trigger any other impact, but says that concludes will not cause the Fed to change any single policy, which means they don't have access to any other interest rate scenarios. The second term, then they extend this war and GDP evidence, but this completely assumes that debt is finite. They completely drop the utility evidence again here, which tells you that U.S. debt is not finite. We can borrow infinitely, which means none of their analysis applies. The third argument they extend is this automatic stabilizers argument, but they completely drop the ICAN 17 evidence that tells you the actual programs that are effective under automatic stabilizers are not means-tested welfare, their unemployment insurance and progressive taxation, which does not go away in our world. We still solve for recessions better. But second and more importantly, their own card concedes unemployment insurance is one of the major causes as to why automatic stabilizers doesn't work. But for us there. Then you can extend all the offenses conceded. They drop the math term, tells you UBI would increase $2.3 trillion permanently into the economy and raise 4.7 million jobs as a permanent and irreversible economic stimulus in the U.S. economy, which doesn't go away in an affirmative world. But then they drop the emergent evidence, tells you every 1% increase in GDP creates 1 million jobs, and we're creating 4.5 million jobs, 4.5 million jobs permanently. The Interwadi evidence says jobs are the best way to get out of poverty. It's a clear affirmative ballot insofar as jobs growth is the most important way you're going to be voting on any poverty impacts. Now let's go to their case. At the top, they extend this evidence from Michigan that tells you that people receive $21,000 a year, but we literally read the methodology. It says it's the amount of welfare versus how many people are in poverty. The alternate evidence is pretty clear and telling you that's the wrong way to calculate how welfare is used. The alternate evidence calculates how many people withdraw from the welfare system and tells you overall that's only $9,000, which means in actual terms, people are making $3,000 more in a world with UBI. We clearly solve for all their impacts. But now, onto the aid argument specifically. They drop our term completely. They just say foreign aid allows, they don't respond to the term at all actually. They drop the, ICAN evidence tells you econ growth is permanently higher, which is less susceptible to overall international shocks, and the IMF says that pushes 900 million people into poverty. That's their own evidence that tells you the global poor are affected. But anyway, the Aurora evidence functions as its own independent offense because it tells you positive effects of 1% increase in growth in the United States and developed countries leads to a 0.8% increase in growth in the developing world. That's really important for two implications. The first implication is that means other countries decrease reliance on US aid, which means when aid inevitably it gets cut in any world, countries can still be sustainable, but B, it allows people to actually grow organically. The impact card comes to their own evidence that we just read, which tells you aid lifts people out of poverty by increasing economic growth. It says aid through economic growth lifts 10 million people out of poverty. So clearly, the most quantified way to increase economic growth is in an affirmative world. There is no evidence that tells you how much economic growth happens in a negative world with aid. We tell you specifically every 1% increase in U.S. growth increases the developing world by 0.8%. It's a very clear off that.
I don't have a question.
Actually, I can ask one. So, what kind of automatic stabilizers did the U.S. issue during the 2008 recession?
Food stamps, means social welfare.
Which ones were actually effective at reducing poverty?
Means social welfare.
Well, our ICANN evidence indicates it's actually not means social welfare, but rather two
So
programs.
ICANN evidence says means social welfare did not help.
It says there's only two programs that
See,
work.
the reason that doesn't respond is because our good evidence is the empirical analysis. It says that recessions have gone from every 26 months to 86 months.
Right.
Yes, it says unemployment
Wait.
insurance. It also says food stamps.
Okay, so this is the thing. Your evidence, right, is saying, look, we did an entire package that included food stamps and other means programs, but also included like unemployment insurance and progressive taxation. And that decreased overall recessions, right?
Yes.
Our argument specifically isolates each individual program under the broader program and says, these
No,
things are
because
actually-
your argument is not looking to our study.
Yes,
Our
it
study
is.
says food stamps are specifically
No, it
part of the
doesn't.
reason why we went
You're-
from 26 to 86.
Okay.
The judges can call for this. We're just talking about
Okay, so
evidence.
here's what your evidence says. It says unemployment insurance and food stamps contributed to this overall reduction. Both of those things.
So that means
Our
if you
evidence-
don't have
can I-
food stamps,
can I
even though
please-
there's unemployment insurance,
Can I
there'll be
please
much
finish?
less of that
Can I
effect.
please finish? Okay. Our evidence goes one step further and says of those programs, unemployment insurance is the one that is effective at alleviating the poverty.
No, your evidence does not say that means social welfare is not
You
effective.
never called for it. It
Because
says-
I know that doesn't exist.
Okay, I guess I'm really good at cutting cards because I found the card that says.
So, okay, so your evidence says that unemployment insurance did everything and means social welfare did nothing.
Unemployment
It says the two effective programs were unemployment insurance and progressive taxation.
That does not mean that the other things were not also effective.
Right, but it means the majority of the work was done by the
No,
other.
because
And also-
our evidence
it
is
also-
specifically about the decrease in frequency.
More importantly, the evidence is clearly doing an internal comparative among all the programs that are enacted and isolating unemployment insurance and progressive
No, you
taxation
can't
as the
claim
most
that that is a
important.
link into our turn because our evidence is the one that
It's
does
not a
the
link, it's
frequency
defense.
analysis.
It's defense on your turn.
Okay, yeah, you can't say that either because
It
our evidence
mitigates
is the
the entirety
one.
of your turn because you can see that the two most effective programs
No,
are unemployment
because
insurance.
our evidence does not mention that.
We're not talking about your evidence, we're talking about our evidence.
Yeah, but our
It's not
evidence is
about
the
you
one.
right now, it's about
Our
us,
evidence
right?
is the one that looks at how recessions have decreased in frequency.
Let's just move on. Do you have a question?
No.
Last time we asked. Okay, I guess we can ask another one. So let's talk about your
Wait, let's actually talk about HDI.
card on growth. What is this? Your card on poverty alleviation. What does it say? One line after it talks about A.
What does it say?
Economic growth lifted
Okay,
10
and
million
we,
people out of
Max
poverty.
does the comparative analysis in the summary. The kind of growth we do is building like schools,
No,
hospitals,
that's-
roads. The
that's not
kind of growth
right.
you do is buying from American businesses.
Right.
All that matters is that we quantify how much growth increases in our world. Yours is nebulous. Sure,
No,
maybe
you
they
quantify
build-
growth. You do not quantify the effect on
Yes,
poverty.
no, no,
You
no.
do
Your
not read a
evidence does
single
that
piece
for
of
us.
evidence that says that growth decreases
Yes,
poverty.
it does.
Your
Your
evidence-
evidence. Your
your
No,
evidence.
evidence-
our evidence says aid leading to
No,
growth
no,
decreases
it says
poverty.
aid.
We do the comparative analysis. You do not.
Oh,
That's
That's
time.
time.
Can you see the card again? I know, after you see the
After
card.
yours.
You can see it now.
We'll see that.
What is it?
After we want to see
The card you just showed us before last time.
Is everyone ready? We're winning off our second contention about how paying for a $4 trillion UBI would force budget cuts, given that 60% of Americans can support cutting foreign aid, that would be the first to go. The Reagan analysis, which they never respond to, finds that foreign aid has historically been the first thing to get cut in tough budgetary times. The work evidence says aid has provided for 40% of the global population, lifting tens of millions of extreme poverty out of extreme poverty every year. They make this growth and recession response. They do not respond to Max's 6 front lines in his summary. First, recessions do not affect aid. According to CS News, aid increased 80% during the last recession. Second, their evidence about 900 million people going to poverty is just about a global economic shock. Even if they prevent American economic shock, a global economic shock will still happen. So there is no uniqueness on their side. But American foreign aid has uniquely lifted millions of people out of poverty. Third, the FDER explains that foreign aid allows developing countries to build up their economies and resist recessions in the future. They affect one recession, we allow them to recover from every recession in the future. Fourth, there's no quantification on their side. All they do is tell you that growth increases in developing countries. There's a reason they can't read evidence that says that poverty decreases. We're the only team that does that. The kind of growth that aid does is building education, food, like hospitals, roads, like infrastructure, things that actually reduces poverty from the ground up. That's why you know it increases the Human Development Index by 3%. They only say American businesses increase consumption and that leads to exports. It's super nebulous, no link to poverty. Finally, growth does not help developing countries because they import inelastic goods, which is why we say that whether there's growth or whether there's a recession, we import the same amount from developing countries. Imports do not link anything. That's why the St. Louis Fed finds that Asia and Africa increased their GDP by 50% the year after the last recession. Again, foreign aid is long-term, it's structural, and it's always there. That's the first place you vote for us. We outweigh on all fronts on that level. Also, on their case, we vote off the turn. We tell you, the Hunger for Democracy tells you that means-tested welfare acts as an economic stabilizer because more people qualify for it when the economy is doing bad and less qualify when the economy is doing good. Our vote evidence is very good. Call for it. It says that unemployment insurance and food stamps have led to the frequency of recessions decreasing from every 26 months to every 86 months. It is very explicit. This turns their argument because even if they help recessions, we make them happen less often. Please call for the evidence. It isolates for means-tested welfare.
We're going to take the last... Is it aid? Oh yeah, I see it's going. Just the aid, and then we'll speak to we'll take the last 50 seconds. Order is going to be our second contention, their second contention. Is everyone ready? All right, start time now. In their final focus, they can see that jobs in the U.S. are the most important impact. We specifically give you the warrant when we tell you that jobs are the only way to lead to long-term climbing the cycle of poverty. Insofar as they have dropped this weighing, it does not matter about the developing world. They agree that jobs are the most important impact. Let's go to how we are creating jobs. Their only our Matthews evidence indicates a UBI would give money to the lower and middle class, leading to $2.3 trillion of spending and 4.7 million jobs. And the Bernstein evidence says, the Zesa evidence says, we would see 12% increase in growth, which the Bernstein evidence says every 1% increase in growth leads to 1 million jobs. If you buy that jobs are the most important impact, you're voting out for this conceded impact that we create the most jobs in the round. Their only response is that automatic stabilizers operate during a recession. But our ICANN evidence specifically says, isolates, that the most effective programs are two programs that would not go away if you vote for them. Even if there's some slight mitigation on using food stamps, our evidence specifically isolates the programs that are most effective would not go away. Therefore, we're winning jobs, we're winning the round. But even if you buy their developing growth argument, let's really talk about it. Their card says economic aid operates through economic growth, which then lifts 10 million people out of poverty. So the real way you're evaluating the round is who prioritizes economic growth in this round. The way that they prioritize economic growth is by building roads and hospitals. Our analysis is much more quantified and much clearer. We say every 1% increase in economic growth leads to a 0.8% increase in developing world growth. At the end of the day, it's the only quantified increase in economic growth in the developing world, and their own evidence says economic growth in the developing world is key to solving poverty. If you believe their card, which says growth pulls 10 million out of poverty, you're voting for us because we create growth in the US, which spreads to other countries, which eventually leads to overall growth. Their arguments about imports do not matter is empirically denied. Our Aurora evidence says it does lead to growth 8.8%, and they have dropped this. They also dropped two reasons why our growth is better than their aid. The first is other countries are going to develop better for the long term if they're using their own growth instead of relying on other people's aid. So when aid does inevitably get cut, they're going to be left with nothing. But in our world, you have long-term growth, so the countries are always reliant on themselves, not some other outside actor. This also functions with their own case when they say aid is already unpopular. Vote after a long-term solution, both for jobs and the developing countries.
developing world versus like American jobs makes for a pretty clean app ballot. The jobs first weighing and second summary and second final focus is like abhorrently awful, no offense. But it's the only weighing in the debate that's in both summary and final focus, so I think it makes for the cleanest app ballot. I think that the I can indict about automatic stabilizers in your evidence only talking about, or including programs that wouldn't be cut under any means tested welfare cuts means that you don't really have any defense on the argument. Insofar as that's true, I think it's a pretty clean app ballot. Economic growth in the United States and job creation, which makes for a pretty clean app ballot. I think that the coordinated developing world debate is a lot closer. I don't really have to evaluate it because of the weighing, so I don't really do that. If I do though, I think that I would still probably end up saying that the app is narrowly ahead insofar as the evidence from the neg would indicate that the internal link between foreign aid and poverty reduction is economic growth. I think the app is ahead on the spillover argument, so if they win economic growth in the United States, they probably will trigger your internal link anyhow. I think the best case from the neg is probably that most of the impacts about poverty reduction in the developing world are non-unique. I think the worst case is that the app is probably narrowly generating offense because if foreign aid is so unpopular, it will probably eventually cut it anyway. I think the app's arguments there are pretty persuasive and never really addressed in first final focus, so that's where I'm going to vote it.
I can go next. I think even if I buy that jobs are the most powerful impact, there needs to be some comparative analysis on the neg case where, maybe not comparative analysis, but I needed to see how your growth in the app world would generate the same foreign aid that they have unique benefits on the neg side to impact those 900 million people. Yeah.
Why does foreign aid matter if you agree that jobs grows?
I think I was weighing the 900 million people that get out of poverty versus jobs. So maybe that is doing a bit of work to them, but even if you say like 4.7 million jobs are created and you're thinking it structurally over the long term, I don't have a reason to believe that the apps can access those benefits to decreasing poverty.
So, and how do those 900 million people get out of poverty in the negative world?
Yeah, the way I saw it was that the growth drives U.S.-specific foreign aid in a world with the UBI. You won't have that. You won't have the foreign aid. So even if you increase it by 1.8% in developing worlds with U.S. growth, they refuted it by saying that that Asia and Africa, they already had growth. I wanted to see it was specific to like foreign aid. So I didn't see how that 1.8% growth, they mentioned it would go just to inelastic goods versus the rest of the people. So I didn't see how, even if it's 1.8% elastic, or 1.8% growth, that it wouldn't go to elastic goods, it would affect people within poverty.
So generally found it's a very close debate, and the cons arguments were sort of more effective in saying that welfare is sort of the best mechanism out of the two, welfare or UBI, to sort of help people more in poverty. And primarily, I think, sort of from your point, your strongest argument was growth, and they effectively said that, I think their argument in terms of growth for businesses was sort of more persuasive rather than growth for actually helping people more in poverty.
Thank you.